Okay, got it. All right. So, congratulations, Cullen Douglas. You survived theater school.
I
You
did
survived
indeed.
two theater schools, as a matter of fact.
I did. I was a glutton for punishment, actually. Yes, I couldn't get enough of it.
So, it was a BFA and an MFA both in acting?
No, you know what? It was a 0 degree. I am still just kind of riding by the seat of my pants. I actually, when I attended AMDA, it was not a degree program yet. Now it is, but back in the day, it was basically they just kind of said, okay, go audition. And then when I went to Florida School of the Arts, it only had an AA degree. And I literally am still to this day 2 credits shy of my degree because I had booked a job out of SETC and it was going to be starting. And I was like, I'm not sitting around and getting my degree just so that I can go get a job. So I went, I took the job, and I never looked back.
I mean, that is, I was just talking to someone who went to the theater school last night, my friend Lindsay, and we were talking about how conservatory, I wish that I had done things differently, but it is what it is. But what you are reminding me of, just go and audition, is like the most valuable piece of advice anyone could have given us, which we never got, which was now the piece of paper that says you have a BFA is not for naught, but it's also not, it doesn't directly correlate to getting jobs. Like it just doesn't. So you got a job while you were in school and said, you didn't even think about staying, or how did that work in your brain?
Well, it was because I was literally just the 2 credits shy kind of thing. And actually the class was it was sort of a lab where I had to help strike sets, but I was so busy with doing shows that I never had time to go help out with strike. So it was one of those things, okay, I'll get that when I can get it, when I have the time. And I never did. And then the tour was starting before the fall session started, and I was like, you know what? My only regret, honestly, was the fact that I felt like, and again, it's not, if somebody were to ask me today, should you go to theater school? I would say yes, if that's really where you want to hone your craft, if you want to, build your community, but don't if you're going to do something like that, go to a program that has an established alumni, because that's where your connections are being made when you get out of school, is that support
Yes.
network that you have. At AMDA at the time, there really wasn't. When I was there, the biggest sort of claim to fame at the time was Tyne Daly. She was a graduate of AMDA. Um, and so it wasn't as if I could reach out to Tyne Daly all of a sudden. And then Florida School of the Arts was and still is such a small art school that there really wasn't anybody for me to reach out to. Had I gone to Northwestern, had I gone to Juilliard or Yale or Tisch, that I would have had a built-in network of working professionals on the outside. So that was my only regret in that. Um, that if I had perhaps gone to a different theater school, maybe I would have had those connections. But I certainly got the education I felt I needed.
Well, and also you got the connections while getting paid instead of having to pay, which is was just definitely preferable. And speak about, work experience and getting connections. You have been on every television show that has ever existed and tons of films too. So was your experience that as soon as you started working, you were just off to the races? I mean, I'm not suggesting that it's easy because no life of an actor is easy, but has it been pretty consistent for you, would you say, through your career?
It's been consistently inconsistent. Um, in that
Wait,
I
I just
had
have to say that has to be the name of your book, okay? We were talking about earlier before you got on about titles of shows and books. Your book could be Consistently Inconsistent. the Cullen Douglas story. I'm just
Yep.
putting it out there. Thank you. Please send me a
Thank you.
10% check to my office. Okay.
Yes. Um, no, it really, it was one of those things that, I had a very dear, professor at Florida School of the Arts, Patricia Crotty. She was the acting instructor there. And I was doing all of the plays. I was in all of the productions there. And I had kind of become the top dog in the school, so to speak. And she pulled me aside one day and she said, the one thing you're going to have to realize is you're probably not going to start working professionally until you're in your 30s. And I didn't really understand what she was saying there. What she was basically commenting on was that I was a young character actor and I didn't look like Jason Priestley. I didn't look, and yet I hadn't grown into my Kramer look either. So I was going to be in this really sort of, where do we cast him? He's talented, but we don't know where to put him. And so I did a lot of theater for a lot of years. And then in my 30s is when I was able to transfer into television and film
So
because I
what
finally had kind of caught up to my look.
Yeah, so what I appreciate about that is it sounds like she said it. So she said it in a way that wasn't like being a jerk, right? Like my experience was feeling that way, except having it told like there is something deficient in you so that you cannot be an ingenue because you're too fat, you're too this. So instead of, hey, go do some theater, do all the things, and then you'll grow into your look. Do not fret. This is like part of the technical side of the business of how a camera sees you and not about your talent. It would have been so much different. Instead, it comes down to, I think a lot of people we've talked to from the DePauls, from the Northwestern say, nobody told me that in a way which was, I could make a plan about it. It was always just, well, you're never going to be cast. So bye. And instead of, hey, maybe you could do theater, maybe you could write, maybe you could do something else until Hollywood catches up to the characteriness of you.
He's
But
exactly it.
good Patricia. Good Patricia. Is Patricia still around?
She is, and she
Great.
literally just announced today that she's retiring from teaching.
Well, Patricia, you did
So
good work, and
she did
you made
fantastic.
it so Cullen. Part of it sounds like she encouraged you because you started with that story of her. Encouraged you to know that maybe later it would be your time to be on every single television show ever written, but for the 20s and you were gonna do some theater and get your training, right? Man.
And I honestly, I didn't completely understand everything she was saying in that little soundbite because I was sort of standing there saying, Patty, look at all these job offers I just got out of SETCs. I'm going to be working like crazy. And she said, no, 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 don't get me wrong. That the work is going to be there, but as far as what you're seeing in your mind's eye of, Cullen Douglas tonight on the Tonight Show, that's not going to happen until you can kind of get into that other stream, as it were.
How so did that match up? I mean, was that a surprise to you, or did that match up with what you already thought about yourself? I don't think any 17-year-old, 18-year-old necessarily thinks of themselves as a character actor, although it may just be because it never gets put to you that that's an option when you're a teenager. The option is, like, as Boz mentioned, ingenue or not ingenue, but they never really say, like, well, but you're going to fit into this different mold. So how did that butt up against what you already thought about yourself?
It actually kind of lined up okay with me in a weird way because at Florida School of the Arts in particular, they were so gracious in the fact that when they picked their seasons, they picked shows that it made sense for me to be the lead in. Um, in that, I'm giving you an example. We did a production of Our Town, and I was the stage manager. And as opposed to being cast as the one of the young, lead ingenue kind of a things. And then we did Bye Bye Birdie, and I was cast in the Dick Van Dyke role. And so they did it in such a way that, or when we did Barefoot in the Park, I was Victor Velasco, the old man who lived upstairs. So I was already sort of being primed that I was this character actor and be going to be doing that kind of stuff. And then, quite honestly, as that look started to emerge, I mean, in college, I had sort of a flock of seagulls kind of hairdo thing going on, and then it quickly all went away. And I have been playing about 20 years older in film and television and in theater than I've actually always been. I was playing guys when I was in my, 30s, I was playing guys in my 50s. Now I'm in my 50s and I'm playing guys
Is
in
in
my
my 70s.
70s.
And I think that, Cullen, the thing that I'm noticing too is like maybe for men it's a little different too, right? Like there's something about being like there's just and it's a societal thing where like women who are playing like it's a insult for women when they're like, oh, we're sending you in for a 50-year-old and you're 30. But and I think maybe if you have a certain kind of ego for a man as well, and we all have egos, I mean it says, but and I love the fact that you didn't, it doesn't sound like anyway, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, you took it as an insult that you were going out for roles that were for like the Victor Velasco's of the world. You were able to embrace it as you were working like that's so I say this all to say because I remember in our last class with Jim Osselhoff, who people call Hostel Prof, and he said to me, you know who you are? And I was like dying to hear you are Michelle Pfeiffer. That was never going to happen, but I was dying to hear. He was like, that's who you, he's like, you are the next, and I'm waiting and I'm waiting. He goes, Lenny Bruce. And I was like, what the actual fuck is going on? What are you
I had
telling me?
no idea what a great compliment that was.
I was devastated. Devastated. I wanted to quit. I was suicidal. Like it was just, but anyway, so what I'm saying is you didn't take that and run with it in a way that was like, I am not Jason Priestley and therefore my life is over. You were able to work and embrace the roles, it sounds like.
I was able to embrace the roles, and I was getting, okay, you're a young Dick Van Dyke, you're a young this kind of a guy. So I was able to kind of make that connection. I honestly, if we're being completely honest here, I think, how do I put this that it does not sound completely like an asshole?
It doesn't matter.
But
We always sound like
but
assholes here. Go ahead.
but um at Florida School of the Arts, I was one of I was one of the only straight men at school. And therefore, Cullen dated a lot. So I was not, the fact that I wasn't looking like the young hot stud
You were still getting
didn't
the right.
affect, I was still getting it. So that didn't, it, had it not been like that situation, I think I probably would have started to hyperventilate, thinking, well, hold it, I'm in my 20s. Why are they making me play these old men? And this is affecting, Cullen's group. But that wasn't the case. And so I had sort of a false sense of ego, I guess, a little bit, but it was supporting the work that I was doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, did you grow up always knowing that you wanted to be an actor? Did you try any other paths first, or were you dead set on this?
I was dead set when the story goes that when I was 4, I asked Santa for a tuxedo to wear to the Emmys. And Santa delivered, gave me a white dinner jacket and spats and stuff like that. So I was ready to go.
Oh my God, do you
Um,
have that picture? Can you please send us that?
no, we have moved so many times when I was growing up. My dad, when I was growing up, was an undercover investigative reporter, and so wherever he was basically undercover was where we were living.
Wait a minute, wait a
Uh,
minute, wait a
which
minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. Okay, this is fantastic because I do a lot of crime writing, and so does Gina writes. And undercover crime reporter father. Now, right there is sort of burying the lead. What in the hell? He was an undercover. What does that even mean? An undercover? He's not a police officer, but he's an undercover reporter.
he was an undercover investigative reporter
What
for a
does that
period of
mean?
time. Um, so I'll give you there was a senator at one time back in the early 70s who was receiving kickbacks from his employees or hiring people on the books, and those people weren't actually having jobs, and so they would then send him the money. He was getting all of the money. And
Sure,
so there
like
was a lot of
Chicago.
shady
It's
business.
like living in
Right.
Chicago all day.
So the somebody tipped my father off that this was happening. And so he went undercover and worked as sort of like an aide and things like that. Or there was a time where he worked at a meat packing place, or he worked at a funeral parlor that was selling caskets with fake bottoms. And so people would buy these incredibly expensive things, and then they would drop them, and then they'd open up the hatch and the body would just drop into a pine box, and then they would reuse the casket.
This is the
So
single greatest thing I've ever heard in my life, and I'm gonna write a pilot about it immediately called Fake Bottom, and
no,
it's
no.
gonna
See, I've already wrote that was I actually wrote a spec pilot, and
son
that's
of
how
a.
I landed my lit agent.
Oh, well, that's
Um, it was because what ended up happening is my dad, much to my mom's chagrin, used me in two of his undercover stings when I was a kid. Um, One time there was a situation where firemen had been hired and they weren't actually properly trained. It was another one of those kind of kickback situations. So it was a training session, and they I was supposedly it was a staged event where they were going to try to test the skills of the firemen or whatever. And so I practiced with a real fireman, being fireman carried up and down a ladder from a second story kind of a thing. But once the word was out that it was an internal sting, they put me into one of those crane baskets. And so I was sort of floating over Midtown in the basket kind of a thing. And then another time, actually, there was a talent agent who was running a kiddie porn ring. And so I was sort of used to expose, so to speak, this person that was actually trying to take advantage of kids and parents.
Oh my God. Well, two things occur to me about that. One is your family was already full of drama before you came along. I mean, anybody who wants to write, who wants to do this investigative journalism, like that's a dramatic person. I love David Carr. I love that kind of personality of the person who wants to like really get in there, investigate. And just as an aside, like I'm sorry for the families who paid for those coffins, but at the same time, good on them, because it's such a waste how much money we've all spent putting mahogany boxes into the ground to decompose over time. Okay, so did your parents like that you wanted to be an actor, or did they have a different idea for plan for you?
Oh, they were 100% supportive. Um, the very, very much so from day one. I think because it was my mom who really sort of stepped in and said, hey, let's figure out how we can get this new kid who's always the new kid to find his people. And she took me when I was 11 years old to a local community theater, children's community theater, and they were doing a production, a musical version of The Hobbit. And um, you know, the intention was that I was just going to audition and be, Hobbit number 40 in the background kind of a thing. And
third habit from the left,
third habit from
as
the
it were.
left. And so they auditioned, and I remember you had to sing a song. And God, I have not told this story. You had to sing a song, and I decided to sing Tomorrow from Annie, because I was madly, deeply in love with Andrea McCardle, and we were actually pen pals. And so I went in there and I sang Tomorrow, and jump cut to that weekend. And my mom came in Saturday morning smiling as I was watching cartoons, and she said, "You've been cast in the lead as Bilbo Baggins." And that was sort of like, okay, I found my people.
That's amazing. Please tell us more about your pen palship with Andrea McCardle.
So I had gotten the album when it came out, and I listened to it and I memorized it. And even then I was casting myself as either Rooster or Daddy Warbucks, and so somehow I found her address and sent her a letter as we used to write, before texting. And she wrote back, and then I wrote back. And then the thing that was really exciting was
Wait a minute.
25
Are you
years
married to
later.
Annie?
No, I am not
Oh,
married to
okay.
any.
Okay.
But 20 some odd years later, I was doing a national tour and staying in a hotel in Hershey, Pennsylvania. Andrea was on tour doing a national tour and was staying in the same hotel, kind of bumped into one another and was like, you don't know who I am, but this, and it ended up, it was wonderful because I went to see her show on my dark night, and she and her family came to see me on the other night. So
Beautiful. Okay, so here we go. Your family's on board, and why didn't you just go and strike it out either in New York or anywhere? Why did you end up going to school? Were you like, I want to learn more, or how did that transition into schooling go?
I did want to learn more. It really was because up at that point, the only influences as far as acting I was going was from, the either the community theater directors or the high school drama teacher who had, aspirations for theater, but was really just doing it because he didn't want to coach the football team. So I felt like I needed a stronger foundation for myself. And but always it was sort of like I was going to the theater school because I didn't feel like, oh, I don't want to go to a school where I'm going to have to learn all of these other things that I'm not going to ever use. Now I look back and go, God, I wish I had done some of that other stuff because I did not create any kind of a fallback plan for me. It
I
was,
mean,
Yeah.
this is either going to work or it's not going to work and you're going to be screwed.
I mean,
And
here's the
so,
thing. Here's the
yeah.
thing. I don't know what you two think, but like there is this two schools of, well, there's probably a bajillion schools of thought, but one of them is like if you have a fallback plan, you will fall back. The other one is not everyone is going to be a Cullen Douglas or a John C. Riley that's going to work, 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 work. So a fallback plan for some of us might have been like another avenue to get into the industry, right? But a fallback plan can also literally have people go and not live their dreams and become, actuary scientists because they're afraid. So it's like, it's so individual, which is why I think theater school training is so tricky, is because you're taking young individuals who don't know shit, and some know what they want to do, some don't, some are good, some are talented but not. It's so individual. So it's like when people ask me, should I go to theater school, I'm like, I fucking don't know. Who are you and what do you want to
Yeah.
do on the planet? But nobody ever asked me that as a 17-year-old, so here we are. Gina, you were going to say something.
Oh, I was just going to ask if you remember your audition.
My audition into theater school. Okay, so um, I remember my audition into um, AMDA. Um, and again, I already recognizing I was a character actor. I sang "If I Were a Rich Man" from Fiddler on the Roof. You know, a skinny ass, kid from, suburbia singing that song. And then I did a monologue from a play that I had done in high school. Um, and
Which one do you remember, or no? It's okay if
it
you don't.
was it yes, no, actually, it was weird because I look back on it now, kind of thinking how the soul sometimes prepares, I think sometimes. Um, it was from a show called Juvie, and I played a young gentleman who was mentally challenged, and um, I got a lot of incredible feedback from the role because I had researched. I had gone to the library, and there was a thing called microfiche when you would go to the library and you'd have to look up stories on kind of like a big machine. And I did all of these kind of things and researched the roles, and I saw images of babies and young people with different kind of cognitive delays. And so I did that. I got into AMDA, whatever. Again, sort of jumping forward in life. In 1996, my oldest son was born, and he happened to be born with Down syndrome. And when I met him for the first time at the bassinet, I immediately went back to that microfiche machine in high school and remembered seeing babies and images of people with Down syndrome. And so I made that kind of connection. So it was sort of like, all right, this is where life was going. As far as Florida School of the Arts went, um, I actually didn't audition for that. What had happened is I was at AMDA. I broke my foot during one of the dance classes. They would bring in dance captains from various Broadway shows and teach us routines. And we were doing a routine from Cats, and I jumped off of a piling and I came down
Let me tell you
flat-footed.
something. This is just one of the many reasons I don't care for that musical. Is that also what are you having people jumping around for that aren't I just anyway, I'm glad they brought I'm sure it was a great experience in some ways, but like I just don't care for that was my first musical I saw and even as a kid I was like I don't buy this at all. I don't know what's going on here, but I don't like it. But anyway, so you busted your foot. Oh, and can I just say about microfiche? I'm sorry to be an asshole, but like I could never figure out how to slow the fucking shit down and I never could see a goddamn story, so I gave up on the microfiche. So you made it further than me. I was like, why is it going too fast? That's like so indicative of my life. But anyway, so okay, so you broke your foot, and so what happened? You had to. Why did you?
So I broke my foot. I went home to my parents' place, who were now living in Florida, and kind of rehabbed for a while. I then auditioned for a play for Pirates of Penzance. Excuse me, that was up performances up near St. Augustine, Florida. And I went up there and I was playing Samuel, the second pirate, and the gentleman who was playing the modern major general in the show was actually the dean and artistic director of Florida School of the Arts. And he said to me, if you'd like to come to school, we'll offer you a full scholarship and you can start at the as soon as the show closes. Um, and so that's what I did. It was like I just went straight to Florida School of the Arts and I did not go back up to AMDA
So
after my foot had healed.
Colin, it's really interesting. Like, and I was talking about this with someone else yesterday about how obviously, one thing leads to the next. Oh, it was a showrunner actually that I was listening to a lecture, and she just said that what I've done is I have walked through doors that have opened to me without a lot of second guessing. I followed my heart in terms of who took interest in me and who opened doors for me. I walked through them. I didn't say no, but, or no, I just did it. And so it sounds like that's what you did. You were like, oh, full ride. I'm in Florida now. You could have been like, no, 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 I'm going to go back to AMDA because whatever. But you were like, I'm going to do this. And it sounds like it worked in your favor. But what was your experience like at Florida? Did you, I mean, obviously we know you left early, but did you get stuff out of it? Did you love it? What was the deal?
I did love it in the sense that because it was such a small school, and because of where the school is located, it's in Palatka, Florida, which is sort of geographically in the middle of sort of Jacksonville and Gainesville. And so on a Friday night, there really wasn't any partying going on. It was all of us getting together and doing monologues for one another, because there wasn't any place to really go. And then as far as the classes went, because it was such a small institution, so many of my classes were literally just myself and the professor in their office. And we would do, you know, that's how I learned dialects, was literally just, we were working on the Italian dialect or whatever, and I would go in and the professor would speak to me in that Italian dialect, and then I would have to answer him, and that would be the entire class. And then the next week we would do the Brooklynese. And so I had all of that, and they were very, very gracious to me because when I came in as, quote, a freshman, I was taking all of the freshman courses, but then they also had me taking all of the second year acting
Mhm.
courses as well, sort of accelerating me through the program. And then allowing that, by doing that, I was able to be cast in all of their different productions.
So when you did finish with school and enter the workforce, what what surprised you about sort of the business that maybe you weren't expecting or hadn't been prepared for in terms of your training, or and it could have been a happy surprise or not such a happy surprise, but like what was some I always just feel like there's people have their list of things. Oh, I never thought the one that people always bring up is coverage. I never thought when I watched TV shows that they'd had to do the same thing 50 times.
I think for me, the biggest sort of, even though Patricia Crotty had said, hey, it's going to be a while before you're going to start to work, although I did work immediately when I got out of school, um, it was one of those things where I quickly realized that they really didn't care that I had played Albert in Bye Bye Birdie. They didn't care that I was in all of the productions. It was basically, no, you've earned the right to stand in the back of the line, and you're going to have to, get up at an ungodly hour, go to Equity, sign in at 6 a.m., and then come back at 2 in the afternoon for your audition. But by the time you come back, if you pick up backstage, you're going to read that Robert Sean Leonard has already been offered the role that you're auditioning for at 2 o'clock. So those were sort of some of the realities of, oh, okay, this is not necessarily going to be the projecting thing that's going to get me into the room. It's going to be more for me that, okay, I feel like I deserve to be here and I'm confident enough in my abilities. But I think that was as far as just working in general. But Gina, to answer the question as far as like the thing that I was most surprised by within the industry, I'm trying to think if there was anything that I really was sort of taken aback by.
Well, I guess I can ask, like,
Yeah.
what was your, like, like in terms of getting an agent and all that, did anything there go like, oh my gosh, I didn't understand that I would have to? How did your representation come about? Was that a surprise, or did you just get an agent? Because a lot of our listeners, some of them, we talk about like a showcase, but you left early and just started working. So what was that transition like in terms of getting representation and going on auditions for film and TV or theater? And if you think of anything that surprises you along the way, just let us know. But that,
Sure. I didn't have I didn't have legit theater representation for a lot of years. I was literally very lucky in that, you know, just using relationships, you know, to help propel me into the next situation, that one show would be closing and I would hear about the fact that they were looking for something else, or I would go to the Southeastern Theater Conference and audition and be able to pick up my next year or year and a half worth of work. And I was able to kind of keep it at that point. I finally did get an agent who was going to cover me theatrically as well as, commercially. And I remember her telling me, she was basically saying the same thing that Patty Crotty had said, is that, you're a good actor, I'll put you out there, but it's probably going to be a while before you're going to book a commercial or any kind of television, because you're just really hard to place. She was good to her word. She put me out there, and a week later, I booked a Budweiser commercial. So I was like, oh, okay, I think I got this. I think the hardest lesson that I had to learn was that, because it sometimes came easy, it felt like, oh, okay, this is what it was, is I would get, say, to that chunk of change. And I it took me a while to figure out that I had to make that chunk of change stretch as far as I possibly could, because I didn't know exactly when the next job was coming from. And then it was hard when I met and fell in love with my wife, who was coming. She had been a model, but she had also worked in the corporate world. And so she was very accustomed to, well, no, you make this amount of money every month, and this is what you can expect with your expenses. It was hard when we started to realize, oh no, Cullen just got a great windfall of money. But if you break it down and spread it out over a year, he's not making minimum wage. So, it was a really that was a hard kind of thing to adjust with.
Yes. I mean, yes, that's a common story, and that's something that they don't teach you about in theater school. They don't teach you money management and how you have to withhold taxes and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so that's a whole education in and of itself. Um, but you're also a writer and director. When did the writing, directing, and producing come into your career?
The writing actually started in college, um, in that we would have to have monologues for class, and I had an affinity to writing the monologues, and so I started writing monologues for my classmates for beer money. Or they would need an audition piece for something in particular, and so I would tailor it to sort of echo whatever play that they were auditioning for, kind of a thing. And so it really just sort of came easy for me. And then whenever I was auditioning, my biggest thing was I don't want to go in there with something that they have seen 3,000 times. And so I was like, okay, you know what? I'm just going to write my own thing. And it worked. It worked to a degree. And so that's where I sort of started to do it. And then personally, after my oldest son, Gabe, was born, I had a lot of demons to be dealing with. I didn't understand why I had been chosen or whatever, or given a child with a disability. And it took me kind of having to get out of my own way to realize that was the least interesting thing about him. And but in doing so, I started to write in journals, and then I ended up writing a one-man play that I in turn toured the country with for a handful of years. And it was that play that I then attracted some other attention, and then got hired on to do some other writing and script doctoring or whatever. And then, as I shared earlier, I wrote a spec script about that time of my life when we were kind of moving into hotels and things like that. And then that kind of just started to snowball. And then I was very fortunate back in 2010. I had the Humanitas organization, Humanitas Prize. They tapped me as the first recipient of their New Voices fellowship program, which pairs you with showrunners to sort of mentor you in creating a television series. And so I was paired with Shonda Rhimes over at Shondaland, and was able to develop a show which was actually an adaptation of my one-man play about a family, coming to terms and dealing with a child with a disability. Um, but I had already actually had a relationship with Shonda prior to that, because I had gotten cast in an episode of Grey's Anatomy, and she and her producing partner Betsy Beers put me up for an Emmy for that role. And then when I didn't get the nomination, Shonda turned around and created a role for me over on Private Practice.
Oh my God.
And
Wait, I didn't know.
uh,
I'm sorry I haven't
I'm
done.
sorry.
I said I'm sorry I haven't done all my research apparently because you're super famous and Shonda Rhimes loves you and you this is insane. So you wait a minute. Okay. So you're very fancy, which I'm coming to, which is always nice during an interview to like realize someone is really amazing. Um but I okay, so you know all these people, and I guess I'm mindful of time, and I want to know what the hell are you doing now? You have this documentary. What is your jam right this second, Cullen Douglas? And if you could do anything, what would it be? And tell us about this documentary, because what I don't want to happen is it's like 10 minutes go by and we haven't heard about the documentary and we haven't heard about like what is your jam and your juice right this second.
Okay, so I made the documentary. I started working on it when we got locked down. The world was hurting, the industry was shut down. I couldn't stand in front of a camera. I couldn't direct a bunch of actors in a narrative, but I knew I could still tell stories. And so um, At one point in my career, I detoured and I was an associate show director and a performer at Walt Disney World. I was there for about 3 years. And the level of talent in those theme parks is just incredible. You know, there are a lot of people who come out of theater schools and they get their job, you know, at Dollywood or at Busch Gardens or at Disney World or Disneyland, and they spend the summer there and then they go off and do whatever else with their life. There are other individuals, like the subject of my film, Billy Flanagan, who he started right after theater school. He went to Boston Conservatory. He then opened up Epcot in 1982 as a kid of the kingdom and has been working for 40 years straight as a performer out at Disney. When the Disney park shut down because of the pandemic, Billy was without a stage for the first time in his 40-year career. So what he did is he took it upon himself to start doing singing and dancing telegrams for other performers who were out of work. And then he started to literally take it on the road because he's a cyclist, and he started crisscrossing the entire country delivering these singing, dancing telegrams called flanograms. And my Facebook page was blowing up with I got flanogrammed, I got flanogrammed. And I reached out to some old friends from Disney and I said, I've heard about this name Billy Flanagan for years. He's a legend. He was a legend 20 years ago when I was working. You know, can you put me in touch with him? And so I spoke with Billy. I reached out to my producing partner and I said, there's a documentary here because Billy has just been so incredibly selfless. He's always a pay it forward kind of a guy. He's a performer's performer, you know, even though he jokes about the fact that he'll get a nosebleed if he's not on center. But it's one of those things where he just really is about making the other people on stage look good. So he's been the face of Disney, but then what ended up happening is he was so busy working and raising an entire family that a handful of years ago, Billy finally slowed down and realized that he had been living a different life than he perhaps should have been. And he came out, and it really destroyed his family and brought things down. And so you had this guy who day in and day out was still having to give that Disney, you know, razzmatazz, but behind the scenes, as we all know as performers, the show's got to go on. And so his heart was breaking. And so I said to Billy, look, if we tell your story, we're going to have to tell all of it because I feel like you sharing your humanity and your pain is going to help other people out there within the LGBT community who are feeling bullied or feeling like they don't have their place. So if we can do this, this is sort of our mandate. And he said yes, and his family said yes, and thankfully, not as a direct link to the film, but I shared the final cut with Billy and his family because obviously I had to have their final approval. And Billy called me and said, this film is helping heal my family now.
Oh, I love
Because
that.
it had given them that creative distance that it was no longer them. It was these other people up on a screen talking about a period of their life. So right now, the film premieres digitally on October 7th and then is available on DVD November 15th. And then after the first of the year, it'll be looking like landing on one of the major streamers.
Oh,
Um,
that's
so
fantastic. I'm so excited to see it because I watched the trailer and that thing that you were describing about, you know, he's got to always have a stage that comes through from the first frame you see him. You think, wow, this guy is like a consummate performer in a way that I could never imagine. I mean, yes, I love to be on stage. It's fantastic, but I don't have this thing where like, you know, I've got to be performing every second. And that was really clear. And I didn't glean from the trailer that he was doing that for fun for other performers. I thought he was just starting his business with the singing telegrams. So that is even more interesting. Okay, that's really cool. So after the first of the year, it'll come out on a streamer. And actually, when you know which one it is, you'll let us know and we'll promote it
Yeah.
on our socials.
And
I
I
can't wait,
wanted
but you can pre-order now. You
okay.
can
Okay,
pre-order
okay,
on
good.
the DVD and
So
the digital.
Yeah, I
Okay.
didn't mean to like cut us off from Shondaland, but I
No,
really wanted to make sure that we talk about this documentary because I think that
thank you.
it's taking your career and your life in it. It's like it's made it bigger and about other things other than, I mean, it's like there's a service component to documentary work that like I think is not always there in other kinds of media. That documentary work is like at once, for me anyway, really personal but also universal, and also has a great capacity for healing. And so, or at least the truth, right? Like what is the truth? So that's why I wanted to make sure we covered that. But if there's other things you want to say about your career and like what you're doing now and where you want to go or anything else, I want to give you the opportunity, but I wanted to make sure. So I didn't mean to cut off your Shonda Land story because I know people are
No,
probably like, "Oh my God, tell more about Shonda Rhimes." But I wanted to talk about the Billy documentary.
I appreciate that so much. No, you know, just to sort of bookend the documentary, I never felt like uh, it was one of those things that I knew I could tell stories, but I didn't feel like I had any business telling a documentary. I don't necessarily even gravitate towards documentaries. Um, but I just felt like, hold it, this truly is a story that needs to be told and can maybe bring about a little bit of healing. And that's what I think good films and television do, that we see ourselves mirrored back in many ways and we feel less alone. And so I felt like if I could do that with a narrative, maybe I can do it with a documentary. That's not to say that I want to become a documentarian, because it's not that I wouldn't if the opportunity ever presented itself, but it's the same way in which, writing a narrative feature, it's like, well, I've got to be compelled to want to tell this story, kind of a thing. And this just happened to be the medium in which to tell it, as opposed to making a film about a guy named
Right.
Billy who wants to start out
So,
being a performer.
and I think that you said a really good word that we talk about sometimes in other ways on this show and in my life I talk about is being compelled. So when someone is compelled to do something, I know that the art created from that feeling of being compelled is usually authentic, true, necessary, and sometimes healing. So I love the word when doing projects that were compelled. So anything else that you're compelled to do right now?
Work.
Great.
Really.
Yeah.
I really, I still, even after, making this film, I am still very much an actor at heart. um and I love being on camera. I love the collaborative experience working with other actors. um I was very, very fortunate this past season, to work on Barry, with Bill Hader. And Bill, I guess if it was like, what's next? What's my next jam? I would love to be able to emulate what Bill is doing. You know, Bill is the lead. He's also writing. He's also directing all of the episodes. I joked with him that he also ran craft services, because it was literally doing all those things and just watching him effortlessly move from being Barry back to Bill, giving me a note, and then giving a note to the DP, and then stepping back into Barry was just a really wonderful thing. And it's like, you know what, if I can do that, and I have other friends and mentors like Tom Verica. Um, Tom actually directed me in that first episode of Grey's Anatomy, and he and I have since become dear friends. He's now the executive producer and resident director on Bridgerton. He also was the resident director and producer on Inventing Anna. And he
Mhm.
and I have developed a narrative film, that we're looking to produce as well. And so again, and yet, Tom, as sort of an aspiration or an inspiration for me, he started out as an actor himself, and then he directed a lot of Grey's Anatomy, and then the next thing you know, he's playing Viola Davis's husband on How to Get Away with Murder. And then he was also the lead producer on Scandal. So it's like, not being defined by what this industry wants to put you in. I feel like I'm finally at the point in my career where Cullen can direct a documentary, and he could write something for somebody else, and he could act. And again, from day one, when I left Flow Arts early to go out and do the job, it's just because I want to keep working,
Yeah,
you
that
know.
and everybody says that. Everybody says I just wish I could be working constantly, because it's where all the fun of the work is. Not auditioning and getting headshots and whatever. It's doing the work. By the way, Barry is how I came to ask you to be on this podcast, because I didn't watch it when it first came out. I kind of came to it late, and of course binged the whole thing, and it's fantastic. And I immediately went and looked up every single actor to see who went to theater school, because I would love to have them all. What a fantastic show, and what an interesting kind of nice little parallel somehow with your documentary, and also your own story. There's a lot about actors like figuring out what they're doing on screen, and kind of reconciling that with their off-screen life, or even just with their career. Do I want to be this type of actor? Do I want to be this type of person? And Bill Hader has seamlessly gone. I mean, once upon a time, you would not have really thought of a Saturday Night Live person making quite this kind of crossover. And the humor in that show about actors is so perfect. I've seen things that have come close to that, but I've never seen something that you're just dying laughing if you know anything about the acting profession, right?
Yeah.
Vaughn, were you gonna say that?
I
Yeah.
was going to say that. And also that, like, his account. So I have suffered, from panic attacks and anxiety disorder, and his journey through that and with that has given me so much hope as a artist, because he was one of the first people I knew, especially from SNL, especially from comedy, to say, I was struggling with this, and this is how I dealt with it, so it didn't totally destroy my life. And he could have chosen to be like, I'm having panic attacks on set at Saturday Night Live, I'm done. But he worked through it and now is doing all of this. So it gives me a lot of hope. So if you talk to him, tell him there's an anxious lady that really feels like I can really reclaim myself as an artist, and even maybe thrive through the anxiety.
I so appreciate that, Jen. I really do. I have dealt with panic attacks over the years. Again, being that new kid, I was kind of predisposed to, oh my gosh, and luckily I've never had it within my art. It's always been on the other side. But the way in which Bill has navigated all of that is really, truly just, you know, motivating and inspiring on so many different levels. And I think the thing that I also recognize is the fact that Bill never had aspirations to be on SNL. He wanted to be a filmmaker. He was editing, he was doing all these types of things, and he sort of fell in backwards to groundlings and all that kind of stuff. And somebody saw him and said, hey, let's do it. It's sort of like he had to kind of take that detour to be able to get back to doing the kind of things that he really wanted to be doing, which is great for me, because I look at like my time at Disney. Okay, I never would have imagined that that brief time at Disney would have been able to fuel me, in that it brought back into my life
I,
to allow me to direct a film about one of their performers
it's
20 years later.
your story. I'm so glad you came on, because your story is a story about the consistent inconsistencies and the detours that aren't really detours. And for me, like, just being like, I'm just knowing now, going into meetings, being a former therapist for felons, like, that is the thing that people are really interested in. And I fucking never could have planned that in my whole fucking life. And now I'm like, wait, what? So it all works, all our lives. And you're a great example of this. And it's a great way to sort of end the interview and say, like, you're a great example of that. Seeming detours, are maybe just like the thing that is called for and needed in the moment, and you don't know where you're going to go. But it's not like, I think a lot of actors that I talk to, it's like, oh my God, I'm taking a step back. I'm going backwards in my career. And I'm like, wait a second. No, you're not. You're just doing other things on your path. So anyway,
it's not a detour at all. It's the path. It's
right.
The path. It just goes that way.
I literally said almost what you just said, Jen, to my youngest son, Cameron, who has just started his junior year at the University of California, Santa Barbara as a film major. And he had taken a gap year just prior to the pandemic and had gone off and worked as a sous chef at a place in St. Croix. And then came back, and all of a sudden he was in lockdown and he was taking his college courses. And he felt the other day, he was expressing like, I feel like I've had to take this really, I took a wrong turn in this hard. It was like, no, buddy, no, this is awesome because now you've had this life experience that's bringing you to a different place in your art and in your life and in your relationships, that just hold on, because it's just going to get more and more exciting at this point.
Well, why? The other question is why weren't you my dad? I mean, you're my age, so I'm not going to say that. But like, I wish that was. I mean, that's kind of weird. But I'm just getting vibes of like, oh, your kids are lucky.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
This has been fantastic, Cullen. Where can people find you?
Where can they find me? They can find me on Instagram at realcullendouglas.com. I believe that's my handle. I'm not sure.
Or just real Cullen Douglas. Yeah, on Instagram.
I think so. I think I am. And then they can certainly look up Billy Flanagan, the happiest man on earth. And just keep your eyes peeled. I've got a couple of film projects that are coming out.
Yay.
And recurring on a television show that's going to be coming out.
Hey.
So hopefully I'll just keep working.
Oh, yeah.
We'll be seeing you everywhere.
We'll
Thank
see you everywhere.
so much for your
Thanks,
time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you guys. You guys are doing such a great service for everybody out there who's trying to, again, because it really feels like we're in the trenches together. And if we can kind of help somebody avoid a pothole that we just stepped in, why not?
Yes.
Why not?
Absolutely. Better together, better together. Thank you, Cullen.
Thank you, Cullen.
Have
Thank
a
you,
great
guys.
one. Take care.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.